Welcome to another edition of RAM Chat. I'm Beth Leese, Director of Human Resources, and joining me today are Nurse Laura McNeil from Evans Elementary School and Nurse Tricia Smith from PJP and the entire district pretty much. Also joining me is Chief Boyer and Bob Hunter, who is our Director of Operations, Facilities, and Maintenance. So we know that safety is it's a huge concern for our students and our staff. And what's that going to look like if and when we do come back into our buildings? So what we'd like to do on this episode of RAM Chat is just kind of take a few moments, maybe a half an hour or so, to talk a little bit about safety, COVID protocol, what people can expect when they come into our buildings, and what procedures are going to be in place. Okay. So let's start off, first of all, with PPE. There's been a lot of talk at the board table about PPE. Is it in? Isn't it in? What does it look like? Talk to us a little bit about the PPE that is currently in district, what it is, what it looks like. Are there sneeze guards in place? Are there masks? What's available at this point in time?
Right now in inventory, what we have right here on campus are about 3,000 masks. The board authorized with last week's meeting or this week's meeting, another purchase. We have another 60,000 adult masks coming in. These are disposable type, and another 20,000 of children's size, since they've got different base sizes and whatnot. And I know that you took care of, Beth, the cloth masks with the insurance that we have coming in for all staff. So that's basically all covered, and it'll all be in before the 14th of this month, as towards the the purchase contract per se. Some of the other things we already have, we have thousands upon thousands of pairs of gloves. Not that that's a big issue, but some people might feel more comfortable if they have them. I've also ordered about 1,000 gowns, not just for the nursing staff, but again, for that comfortability if you believe you need that. And then we have about 2,800 face shields, which are like the welder mask type. They're adjustable, that go over for those special situations that people may feel more comfortable wearing that on top of their disposable masks. So our feeling was that we would have enough masks in case people forget or if there's messes or whatnot, to be able to outfit everybody for the entire school year, for the whole 180 days. When we get to sneeze shields, the only sneeze shields we have, or sneeze guards, they're called desk shields as well, we've purchased, which will be here before the August 31st situation that we may or may not need them for special education. We plan on buying some more, but again, that's got to be a board approved situation because it's kind of outside of the grant. We were able to ascertain a grant for a substantial amount of money to purchase all this stuff. So that's where we kind of stand with PPE. On the other side of it would be Mr. Hunter with disinfectant and wipes and sanitizer, which, if you don't mind me talking, that it's all either here or it's going to be here in the next 2 weeks or so. So by the time you guys walk in the door, you shouldn't have to ask for anything unless you're just asking your school principal, and it should already be in inventory. So we're very lucky, and we thankfully with the finance and with Rachel and the two Marys to get all this stuff pushed through. So it's going to be here in time.
Excellent. Now, Mr. Hunter, perhaps you could talk a little bit more to maybe some of the sneeze guards that will be on the secretary's desks in the main offices, right?
We created sneeze guards internally. We built them and distributed them throughout the district. So all reception areas have sneeze guards. In all schools, there was a request to have sneeze guards for some one-on-one applications like counselors, which we provided them as well. So they're already set out in place currently. We are currently working on building some guards for our food services point of sales areas. So we're working on that now. And when we open within in-person education, we will be prepared and have those in place at that time.
And what would a cleaning schedule look like? What is the custodial staff going to be doing as far as disinfecting and cleaning the building, and how often?
Well, our cleaning schedule, we're set to clean at the end of the school day, whether that's the hybrid version or the full-on school version. So what that means is at the end of the school day, we're going to go through and do our routine cleaning, what you've come used to expect as of last year. More specific, though, we have a disinfectant process at the end of the cleaning, and that's going to be something that's going to be done on a regular basis. As well as during the day, our day custodians are going to go around and do high touch areas, disinfecting. So to try and stay out in front of that. A couple things that you're going to see different in the classroom this year, as Chief kind of alluded to, we're going to be providing disinfectant wipes for every classroom. What that means is there's going to be classroom disinfectant wipes available for teachers and students if they choose to use them. Also, one of our protocols is we're installing hand sanitizer dispensers in every classroom. They're going to be fixed to the wall and available at the entrance point of every classroom. So that will be in addition to the sinks that we have for hand washing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that information. A question did come up from the staff. If and when they have to come in, when our kiddos come in or whatever the circumstance may be, can they wear scrubs into the building? So the answer to that is yes, absolutely. These are pieces of clothing that can be washed in really hot water to thoroughly clean and then be reworn again. So for anybody who's watching this who had that question, yes, you can wear scrubs if you're asked to come into the building. Absolutely, that's not a problem at all. There's been some talk about a quarantine room or an isolation room or whatever you want to call it, but a place that kiddos will be placed or housed temporarily if they have certain symptoms until their parents can pick them up. Can either Laura or Tricia, can either one of you speak to this?
Yeah, we are required to have an isolation room in every building. And the purpose of this room is that if someone is exhibiting symptoms, in order to ensure the safety of the rest of the building, we need to separate. We also are called to protect those of us who may or may not be high risk. So this is another way that we do that. So the isolation rooms in each building are being chosen by administration in each building, kind of working alongside the nurses. There's a few kind of requirements of the room. We should try to make it somewhere where there isn't a lot of general traffic. It should have its own bathrooms assigned to it, a separate entrance or exit, so that we're not, bringing sick children all through the school to get them out. Am I missing anything, Laura, on that?
No, I would just piggyback on that and say that once the student or staff member is in that sort of isolation room, we would be following the guidelines that are set out by CDC and the Montgomery County Health Department as far as if they have to leave and why, and then when they could return.
Okay, so let's chase that down a little bit. So let's assume that at some point in time, kiddos are back in our buildings and a child asked to go to the nurse because, I don't know, maybe they're experiencing something like common cold type symptoms. Does the teacher then send the child down to the nurse's office? Is that a no-no? Like, what do we do in this situation?
So we are going to have very different protocols for what the health suite looks like. Again, in an attempt to protect our general population and particularly our at-risk students and teachers. And we will be doing staff training on all of this, but what we're looking at right now is that our health suites are going to remain clean. They are only there by appointment only. We will know to expect who is coming, whether it's a daily medication or a daily treatment, or if a student that we're not expecting needs a visit, the teacher will either radio us or call us, and we'll make a plan. We'll either go meet that student somewhere in a triage area or bring our triage cart to the student so that we can determine, okay, this child is well enough to come back to the health suite with us, or this child is exhibiting signs that we do need to send home, and thus we'll use our isolation room and move on from there.
Beth, I would just like to add those isolation rooms, as we actually identified them at every school, we tried to follow the recommendation of having bathrooms and exits in each of those rooms. Unfortunately, not every school has that capability. So just to be clear, some of the spaces have dedicated bathrooms outside of the space, as well as designated doors for exit out of. So just to be clear, so there's no confusion, when we do publish the locations of these rooms, not all of them meet the criteria 100%, but we are within the compliance piece where we have designated areas that they will not be used by other staff or students. Just want to add that point. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. So that just leaves more questions then. So who's going to be staffing these rooms? Obviously, you can't leave sick kiddos by themselves, and you're going to be off triaging others. So what does that look like?
What it looks like is it sounds like the district will be hiring long-term subs. Probably not necessarily for the entire year, but to get us started at least once we start bringing students back, just so that we have a separate person manning that isolation room. At this point in time, we are looking at hiring other healthcare workers so that we can trust that our students in isolation are being cared for in case anything should go wrong, have a little bit of knowledge medically to be able to keep in touch with the building nurse until the student's able to go home with parents.
Now, if a child is exhibiting some symptoms of COVID, but we're not quite sure, are they allowed to return to school the next day if they're feeling better, or what does that look like? Oh, no, I'm seeing a lot of no.
No, we this year will not that we ever made the rules of when someone can go home, but we did follow guidelines by our district physician. And we still will, but we are also receiving pretty strict guidelines from the CDC and then from the Montgomery County Health Department. And when those guidelines aren't exactly the same or when something is conflicting, the CDC does recommend that we actually follow the call of our local health department, because they are the people that will be helping us if contact tracing is needed or whatnot. So no, we actually have an algorithm. I won't explain it here, but it will be available for public knowledge. We don't have the time for this, but it will be available. You can find it probably on the Montgomery County Health Department website, but it's called the COVID-19 School Exclusion Requirements Algorithm. So we will literally be looking at symptoms. If there's one of these symptoms, we must send home. If there's two or more of these symptoms, we must send home. And then it also gives us guidance on how long someone needs to remain home.
Now, would that same protocol then be in effect for our employees as well, if they were exhibiting symptoms?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if an employee starts to feel sick at work, are they better off just going to their administrator saying, I don't feel well, I'm leaving, or are they better checking in with a nurse before they leave?
We would appreciate them checking in with a nurse. I do feel that often happens anyway in our schools. I believe we kind of have a good relationship with our staff members, but in this case, because we need to follow these guidelines and we do need to be tracking illnesses in the school, it would be important that we understand what the symptoms are so that we could help direct the teacher as to when they can return.
I was just going to mention that it would behoove staff that if they are exhibiting cold symptoms or maybe allergy symptoms at home that day, to maybe stay home that day, because they might feel better the next day, which is fine because then they could come in as long as they don't have a fever or any other symptoms. But if we send them home, we have to assume it could potentially be COVID, and then they fall under that 10-day window.
Understood.
Same thing with students too. If a student comes in and the parent knows it's just their allergies, we can't guarantee that it could be allergies and COVID. So then if it's just their allergies, keep them home until it's not their allergies. They're fine, save time.
One of the changes that is going to be very difficult for the nurses, difficult for staff, very difficult for parents, is the fact that we were always in the business of, as long as the child didn't have a fever, if the child had cold symptoms, allergy symptoms, we would provide some tough love and general encouragement. Come on, you can do it. Let's get back to class. You can make it. The common cold lasts 7 to 10 days. You can't stay home that long. Well, now you can. Now you have to. So it's a difference. We're not allowed to encourage you. If we see these symptoms, we need you to stay home until the symptoms are gone and we've met all these requirements.
Well
it's going to
said.
be tricky.
And Trish, maybe I could mention the stats that we found when we were looking back at the visits. So in half a year, we had 51,000 visits to the health suite for students. And out of that, a little over 3,000 went home. So when you think about how many students we were able to care for and get them back to the classroom, because we were using our nursing judgment, they're kind of taking our judgment out of the picture now. And a lot of those situations will have to go home.
With very good reason. With very good reason. Yes.
Talk a little bit about what happens if somebody does test positive. How do we find out? what does contact tracing look like? Talk about close contact. And this is probably a question for all of you. But so what happens when that first notification is made let's first say it was a teacher in a classroom. Walk through what that would look like, please.
We would probably find out, we might find out from the teacher. We might, or chances are we would find out from the health department. Chances are we aren't going to be the first people to know because we aren't doing the testing. So what we have to do is from the day that the ill person first started exhibiting symptoms or feeling ill, we have to look back 48 hours prior to that. So let's say this person went home ill on a Wednesday, was diagnosed on a Friday. We need to look back to the Monday before the check because it's 48 hours of like silent incubation period or whatever, where they could have been spreading these germs. And we need to start figuring out in our schools, where has that teacher been? Who was that teacher got into close contact with? Close contact means within 6 feet of space, less than 6 feet of space for more than 15 minutes. So does an entire classroom of students need to go home? No, not necessarily. But we are going to rely on staff to help us with this. Now, we won't do contact tracing personally. That is for the health department to do. But it will be our job as a school district to assist with determining who was in close contact. And then those people we then have to notify, and they need to stay home for 14 days after their last contact with that ill person.
Can they go and get tested? And if they get tested negative, can they come back before the 14 days is over?
They can go and get tested, but no, they cannot come back. Because if you get tested at day 5, you're not quite done. You may test negative on day 5, but on day 7, your test turns positive. So the 14 days are based on our most updated research and evidence-based studies. So.
And Beth, there's a second piece to that from an operational standpoint. Once we do get confirmed COVID, we identify the space. That's when our COVID response team, we have staff designated for cleaning of those spaces. So what would happen at that point? Once we get notification, we isolate the areas, we shut down building systems within that space. Ideally, CDC guidelines say that in the event that you have a confirmed COVID, ideally it's 24 hours before you go in to clean, to let the droplets settle. Our plan to try and make sure that we're able to not keeping school closed for an extended period, we're going to allow 8 hours after the end of the school day, go in at night and do a deep, thorough cleaning, disinfecting at that point. So that's once that COVID-19 confirmation comes in, it does trigger a cleaning perspective from our end, that specialized cleaning in those identified areas.
Would the contact tracing and notification or anything be different if it was a student who tested positive as opposed to an employee testing positive?
No, there will be no difference. A positive case is a positive case, but what's important is to try to prevent social mixing at school. If students come back, it would be very important that we have our, what do I call this, our roster or our seating chart on the bus, in the cafeteria, in the classroom, wherever, and we don't stray from that. We try not to combine classes. Otherwise, it will get very, very complicated to realize who was in that close contact area of an ill student or teacher.
And Mr. Hunter, perhaps you can answer this question, just to piggyback on what Tricia had indicated. Having a roster and a seating chart for like the cafeteria and things along those lines, how are we handling those larger areas where more kiddos might end up? Like what would a lunch period look like at the high school?
Well, it's going to look a little bit different. One of the ideas that we had to come up with, because the amount of space and currently we're under restriction for gatherings. At the time, it was for 250 people within a school facility at that point. So we had to kind of spread it out. So one of the ideas that we came up with, we expanded the cafeteria at the high school to the auxiliary gym. We took into consideration the amount of room that the lunch tables take up. So our plan is to remove the lunch tables, use desks in that situation. We're going to be able to maintain 6 feet social distancing with the desks set up, not to exceed 250 students at any one time in that cafeteria and or in that auxiliary gym. Those areas are going to be, students are going to be assigned. Specifically to what desk, that's something I would have to confirm at the school level, if they do plan on confirming at least maybe identifying rows, or if they're going to be actual seats. That would be something that we haven't really gotten into the weeds with. That's going to be more at the school level. But the idea behind it is that we're maintaining 6 feet social distancing throughout the eating period, so that the students can remove their masks at that time. And that's one of the guidelines that's currently in place that inhibits us for using our green plan, because we don't have the social distancing with all the students in at the same time to maintain that 6 foot and be able to take the mask off at lunch.
Talk a little bit about the masks, and perhaps I can direct this to Chief Boyer. What is mask protocol? We hear about that periodically. If you can share, when should we wear a mask? When shouldn't we wear a mask? If we're 6 feet apart in a classroom, do we have to? Don't we? What does that look like?
Well, that's a good question. What we would prefer, and I think what the school district is going to mandate, while they're traveling from point to point and while on buses or within gatherings, they should have their masks on. Now, obviously, there's going to be special situations with some of our special students and whatnot that they're not going to be capable of doing that, and we're going to work around that. But for the general population, as to when we start getting back into full operation, they should plan on wearing their mask as much as possible, unless they're directed that they don't have to. So again, and we all know that the guidelines and rules have changed momentarily. So again, but right now we're planning on having the mask on as much as possible. And again, even if that 6 foot's being followed, the best practice is to still have some kind of face covering on.
Okay. Now, I know when I'm in work and I'm in my office by myself, I don't have my mask on. I have it off. But when I go out into the other offices or walk down the hallway or anything, I do have my mask on. Would that be the same type of protocol then that all buildings would have to follow?
Correct. I mean, obviously, you're isolated by yourself there. I look at it like a matter of mutual respect, that because we just don't know what we don't know. So if you notice, I usually always wear my mask, except for now I'm talking on this just so we can give good examples and understand that there's certain things we can't control, and that's a lot of it has to do with airflow. So that's the whole thinking behind this. It's uncomfortable. It's difficult to see what people's real reactions are when they're talking, because all you get to see is their eyes. And it's going to be some challenges for some of our little kiddos and even some of our older kiddos. But still, the best practice, and to keep as many people safe as possible and to keep operations going, is to wear it as much as you can.
You mentioned a little bit about airflow, which is leading me into my next question. And I'm sorry, Mr. Hunter, I'm putting you right on the spot on this one. So, you know, the rooms, we have a common ventilation system. How does the airflow impact possible virus spread, or doesn't it? And what protocols and what's being put in place to help mitigate that?
That's not only a great question, that's a tough question. So what I can say is right now, we don't know enough about COVID at this time to give a definitive answer. And when I say we, I mean ASHRAE, who is the industry professionals who provide technical and guidelines for the HVAC industry. So what I can tell you, ASHRAE has provided guidelines for school opening this year, which we formulated into our HVAC plan. And basically, some of those guidelines, it's about your equipment working properly. So we've gone through and done all of our preventative maintenance on all of our equipment, make sure everything's working as designed. One of the big pushes is fresh air, bringing in as much fresh air as possible. So our systems are set up to be able to provide fresh air and circulate that air to be able to support that. A few other things in there: temperature, making sure maintaining temperature, keeping the systems up and running in full operation to the best extent as possible. And what I mean by that is, you know, typically when students and staff leave, the buildings go unoccupied. So they're recommending that we leave them inoccupied, keep the systems running and circulating air. And if you can't do that, then be able to turn it on 2 hours before and then 2 hours after the last person comes into the building. So these are some of the things that we're taking as action items specifically. But the best thing I can say, and to answer that question, I'm not in a position to answer that with my level of expertise. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. But if there's any more information that someone would like to follow up on, I can give the link to ASHRAE's website that provides more information to exactly what we're talking about.
That would be fantastic. Thank you
Hopefully
so
that's
much.
the answer.
No, it's a complicated question, and I understand that. So thank you. I apologize for putting you on the spot with that one. So now I'll put Chief on the spot because this was alluded to earlier, but just to make sure that I'm clear, whose jurisdiction are we under as far as following the protocols? CDC, Montgomery County Department of Health? Like, is there stuff that we just need to make up as we go along as an LEA? What does that, how does that operate?
Well, Tricia kind of covered it earlier. Sometimes they differentiate there's differences between the two. And right now, since Montgomery County and Chester County for Spring City are going to be the ones that are going to handle that, tracing aspect of this and be calling us for information and giving us information, we're going to follow the county's guidelines because in the end, ultimately, we answer to them. The nurses with their license, me as a sworn officer, we kind of have to work hand in hand with them. And they're very, very, very good at helping us out too. Like when there's those questions we just don't know the answers to, they're going to give us guidelines and direction as to who needs to be notified, what those processes are, so we don't make any errors and we don't cause any kind of hysteria that isn't necessary. We just want to keep the most people safe as humanly possible in this really difficult time. So it's just another piece of the puzzle.
Thank you so much. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewing audience about the safety, social protocols, or what might be taking place if and when people do return to our buildings?
I think one thing, and I was just thinking this as Chief was talking, is that this is very fluid. Some of these rules and regulations that we're talking about, that we've talked about today, may change by the time we're all back together again in school. And we just have to trust that we're all doing our very best to stay up to date with science as they discover it.
One last thing before we go, I know there's concern about some privacy issues. So if somebody is diagnosed with COVID and is either sent home or doesn't come in, and we find out that that person's positive, we're not required to share names of individuals. We're still protected under HIPAA, FERPA, the whole 9 yards, correct? So
Correct.
Confidentiality will be maintained through the entire process of notification to parents, notification to staff, whatever that is, correct?
Correct. If you need to know, if you have been exposed, you will find out that you've been exposed and you will learn what to do about it. And that's all you'll need to know.
Okay, but as if a student's missing from class for a couple days and kiddos start to talk, what are your suggestions for handling something like that? Is it education? Is it just, hey, everybody gets sick and we have no idea why the student's out or the staff member's out? Any suggestions looking from an educator's lens on that?
I guess the most important thing to just say is that, well, that's so-and-so's personal business. That's that. Open your books.
Thank you. Chief, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think everybody kind of touched on it a little bit. There's been literally thousands of man hours put into all this different planning, and obviously it's not going to be perfect. We really, 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 really need parents to help us with this, because if it doesn't start at home before they get on the bus and come in, I don't know how long we'll be able to stay open. And that's a big fear for us, and that's something we just can't coordinate. And I know every parent in our school district has the same intent. They want their kid to be safe. They want to be safe, but it has to start at home. So even if there's an inkling of any kind of issue, you can reach out to us. We'll give you the best information we have at the time, but it's better than putting out the much bigger emergency later on if there's an issue. So again, we're all in this together, and I know everybody here has fielded tons and tons of phone calls, and we will continue to do so. But we serve you guys, and we're just trying to make our kids as safe and our staff is possible. And again, just be flexible and try to be patient. Sometimes things don't happen as quickly as I'd like them to either, but that's just the way it goes. So.
Just a few final thoughts for the 12-month employees. We have a process in place whereby every morning when they come in, there is a survey that they must complete that indicates that they've checked their temperature a half hour before they left for work, that if they're reporting to work that their temperature is under 100.4 degrees, and that they agree to abide with the standards of the CDC guidelines are while they're in the workplace. I'm not sure what that's going to look like if and when staff comes back and when the kiddos come back, but that's currently what we're doing for our 12-month employees. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, so people do understand that we are putting what we've been discussing here has already been put in place for our 12-month staff as well. Anything else you'd like to add? Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days. I know everybody's kind of responding to a lot of emails and phone calls and whatever other types of communication is being sent your way. But thank you so much for doing this, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise, and very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.